All right, so I'm excited to get started with Ruby on Rails. It's been a long time coming. We started off on week 1 with just doing small little apps with like Deaf Grandma. Remember Deaf Grandma? That grandma is always very unhappy to hear from you. And then we had like 99 bottles and things like that. And I did warn you, we did start off with just one file and usually one test file, so 2 files at most we were working with. And now, as of today, I think the number is, let's see, 36 directories and 56 files are going to be inside of your particular repos. So we spent the last 3 days doing, the last 3 days doing Sinatra kind of stuff.
I was gonna say we're not forking them, so
it's boilerplate. Like it's like when you do, I'll show you when we do like gem install Rails and we create a new Rails app. There's 36 folders and 55 files already built in.
Okay.
Yeah. So last 3 days we've been spending doing Sinatra, and Sinatra is kind of like, we call it baby Rails. Baby Rails because it's like, it's very small. You get to choose what you need to put into it, but it basically taught you how to use some small amount of frameworks and then some small amount of like basic CRUD. And there are companies that do use Sinatra. So DRW, most of the stuff that the team I'm working on uses Sinatra because it's lightweight, it's small. Like you only get to pick and choose what you want to put inside of it. Rails, on the other hand, is a giant Goliath. Like when you do gem install Rails and you create a new Rails app, like there's 36 files, 36 folders, 55 files, and it has the ability to send email if you want, to do text messaging if you want. I mean, not text messaging, to do instant messaging if you want. Like a lot of stuff is already built in. It's like it's very heavy-handed. For most people, that's good. Like you want all that functionality. But for some people, they're like, I just wanted to do this small thing. Rails is overkill for that particular situation. Like you wouldn't take like if you could kill somebody, and this is a bad example, if you could kill somebody with a knife, why would you take a giant like King Arthur sword and slice them in half, right? Like one of them will do the job, but if you really want to send a message, I guess you could use the King Arthur sword. But the idea is like you get to pick what your poison is. If you want something small and lightweight, you use Sinatra. If you want something huge and much bigger, you use Rails.
Sinatra runs faster.
Sinatra's faster, yeah, because it's just smaller. There's less stuff to load. Like you only had like 10 files or something like that, and this one by default, without you writing any code, already has 55. So those extra 45 files do take some extra time to load up. So a few things I wanted to point out. Like some people say Rails is dead, and I won't disagree with the fact that Rails is not fast. It's not fast. That's just what it is. But Rails is still being used today. It will continue being used today because during like the 06 to 08 kind of like boom of like, I guess 06 to 2014 boom of web technologies and web development and stuff like that, there were a ton of companies just getting their businesses off the ground with Rails because it was fast. Like it's fast to get off the ground, but it's not fast overall as you scale and grow larger. So it will still be around for quite a while. A lot of people use it for internal stuff. I'm seeing more and more like older companies starting to use it. They're like, oh, we are very new and using cutting edge technologies. We use Ruby on Rails. I was like, Ruby on Rails has been around since 2006. Like it's not brand new technology anymore, but there are still companies using it. I wanted to start off today by kind of showing you a few 10 companies, famous things that you've probably heard of that were built on Ruby on Rails, which means that in some way, there's still people who know Ruby on Rails at these companies because the companies have gotten large very quickly. So the most popular one is Twitter. Twitter at the very beginning, when they were just starting off, was, it was basically Facebook statuses. But someone's like, I'm going to make an entire platform out of Facebook statuses. And Twitter was actually written in Ruby on Rails. There's a company here in Chicago called Basecamp, and I just wanted to take a quick sidebar to kind of show off Basecamp. So Basecamp is here. It's a consulting firm here in Chicago that also writes open source software. DHH, who's the founder of Rails. Instagram DHH. Yes, the Ferrari man and the racing person with his 31,000 followers. Yeah, who basically just drives luxury cars now because he wrote Ruby on Naked Baby, and like takes all these really cool photos and stuff like that. This person wrote Ruby on Rails, and he's still the core contributor of Ruby on Rails today. So most of the things that that if you want to put big features in, you're going to have to go through him. But he owns this company called Basecamp. It's here in Chicago, but it's also fully. Let me see. Learn. I want to see if they have a jobs thing because it's here in Chicago, but it's also they have a fully remote team. Oh, here it is. We don't have any open positions. That's totally okay. They're spread out across 32 cities, so they have all these like really cool perks. So the salary range, it's like only top 5. Like if you're going to be a junior developer there, junior developers generally get paid between 60 and 75,000. They'll make sure that you're within the top 5% of 75,000, as close to 75,000 as possible. You're fully remote. You only work 40 hours. You have summer hours. A lot of companies are starting to do that, where it's only you don't have to work on Fridays, or you can leave half a day early every single day, or 2 hours early every day, or something like that. All this stuff. They have a fitness allowance. They have paid vacation, 3 weeks minimum, 1 month sabbatical every 3 years. You get a massage allowance, whatever you want, any standing desks, co-working stipends, all this kind of stuff. Like a lot of companies are starting to move towards remote only positions. Generally, it's not for juniors, so don't get your hopes up too quickly. Maybe around 3 to 5 years, you'll start getting those remote jobs. But like, there's a lot of perks as well. But I just wanted to kind of do a quick sidebar, just to kind of promote Basecamp, since they are the people who write and mostly continue to support Rails. But other companies, yellowpages.com, Hulu, SlideShare. Who uses SlideShare anymore? GitHub. Surprisingly, GitHub is written primarily in Ruby on Rails in the backend. Shopify, which is like an e-commerce store based in Canada. Groupon, everyone knows Groupon. Urban Dictionary didn't know, and then Airbnb. So like these very large companies at one point like decided to use Ruby on Rails to get their app off the ground and working quickly.
And some of them have since switched.
Some of them have since switched. So the issue with something like Twitter is that Ruby on Rails is good if you want to get an app off the ground very quickly. So like I just want it to work. I have $60,000 worth of cash. I got 2 months to use it, and I have to hire all these different developers and stuff. And I have to show a prototype to my investors by the end of 2 months, or else we lose everything. You are against the clock there, and you can't write everything. Like I can't think about the future. I have to think about right now because I have to pay the bills. I want to make sure these people have jobs in 2.5 months. So you can get something off the ground very quickly, but it's slow. Meaning that Twitter, like Active Record and hitting the database inside of Rails, it'll take around 200 hits a second, which just seems like a lot for a very easy prototype. However, Twitter, with the number of followers they have now and the number of users, they probably have 200,000 hits a second, if not a little more, give or take 100 to 200,000 hits a second. And with that, like Rails just can't keep up. So you have to find something that's much faster once you get. That's a good problem to have once you get there, because that means I'm growing. I got a lot more money, but now I had to rewrite everything. So they probably moved over to something Java based, because Java is much faster. Okay, no more Naked Baby and getting jealous over all of these nice pictures.
Like swordfish or something.
Yeah. All right, so Sinatra, like I was saying, is a lightweight version of Rails, and generally seen as kind of like a counterpoint to Rails. Rails is very heavy. Sinatra is very light. Sinatra doesn't tell you how to accomplish things, but you have to make your decisions yourself. Rails, on the other hand, says there's a Rails way of doing things. Like this is the right way to do it, and they're very, very opinionated. It's good for people who are just learning, because it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to go with what people agree to be best practices, and then I don't have to do as much thinking off the bat as I'm learning all of these other things. So some things that they think of, like when you're creating your own database and you're doing SQL and creating schemas and stuff like that, you have to assign the ID number, and you have to tell it to automatically increase every single time, and that's not the greatest thing to do. Like you know that if you're using a SQL database, you're going to start with a primary key as an ID, and it's going to go up with every single number. If you notice inside of Active Record, you never have to type the ID. It's because those kinds of small decisions you don't have to really think about anymore, because they're like, you're going to need that 99.9% of the time, so I'm going to make that decision for you. So yeah, that rule is generally called convention over configuration. So you'll hear that a few times as people talk about it. Convention over configuration. The convention is when I have like for example with the SQL database, I'm always going to start with a primary key called ID, and it's always going to increase when I add new records. That's the convention, right? So I don't want to keep configuring that over and over again when it's just the convention to do so. So they make a lot of choices for you where it's just like, yeah, everyone's going to do it, so we might as well just keep it in here. That's the idea behind convention versus configuration. You're going to see a lot of what's called Rails magic, which stuff just kind of works, and Rails will just kind of guess for you. It's a result of tens of thousands of people writing many lines of code over many years, collectively coming together and saying these are probably the rules that people will need in order to do 99.9% of the web development out there. For most of your working careers, unless you're working at like a proprietary trading firm where you're actually writing the algorithms, or you're working for NASA, or you're working for Google in some ridiculous way, 99% of your job will be CRUD apps. So like most of this will still be applicable no matter where you go. So we're going to start our first Rails project. We're going to build a CRUD app called Businesses. So we're going to do gem install Rails is the first thing. And you don't really, if you want to take extra notes based on what I'm saying, that's okay. But all the stuff I'm saying is literally inside of your curriculum.
And your video.
And a videotaping, even better. So gem install Rails. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. So they have active support as a library that Rails needs. Action view, action pack, active model, active record. This one's the one that we are familiar with. Active job takes care of the things that run in the background. Action mailer takes care of things for like emails and things like that. This is taking forever. Why is this taking so long?
It's Rails.
Because it's Rails. Action cable is the library for doing instant messaging. So you can kind of see when we did gem install Sinatra, very, very small stuff, very quick to install, but this one is probably taking upwards of 30 seconds. Getting a little impatient here, but that's okay. Okay. All right, so it took 60 seconds, but we have all of the libraries that go inside of Rails. So Rails, again, Rails is a framework. And a framework, like we've been saying since day one, is just thousands, in our case, tens of thousands of lines of code that make your job as a developer easier. Now, you could write your own thing to render all the views and to connect to the database and do all the emails and stuff like that. You could write all these libraries, but they figured since most web developers on most apps are going to need to take care of showing the views to a user, taking care of all the database records, sending emails, doing instant messaging. We're going to wrap that all into what we call Rails. Rails is, again, a framework, thousands of lines of code that someone wrote to make your life easier. It's an amalgamation, more or less, of all of these different libraries. Active support, action view, action pack, active model. Like these are all small little modularized components to make up the giant Rails. Just like when you go out, the U.S. military is equivalent. Think of the U.S. military as Rails. It's a bunch of it's smaller branches that make up the entire thing. So like, of course I'm talking about because I'm not military, but there's the Navy, there's the Air Force, there's the Army, and there's the Marines, and then all the reserve branch. What's that? And the Coast Guard. I did hear people ripping on the Coast Guard. Is that a thing? Like,
yeah,
yeah. I know it's a thing, but is it like your group started ripping on them. I don't know why that is. Okay, whatever. Well, it's kind of like saying like all those different branches make up the U.S. military at large. All of these different libraries make up Rails at large. Rails does not exist without all of this, and the U.S. military in its entirety does not exist without one of those branches. So we've gem installed Rails. I'm going to just load up a new project. Rails new. We're going to call it businesses.
You get rid of one of those modules if your company outgrows like the Rails database thing. Can you use your own Java thing and then integrate it to the rest of Rails?
Probably, but the amount of time. So the question was, let's say that your company gets out of scope of active record. You get above 200 hits a second. Like you get to 500 hits a second. At that particular point, taking active record out and putting a Java thing in will probably take more time than just moving completely over to Java. All right, so this is the command that we will run most of the time. Rails new, the name of your particular repo. -D is basically saying which database adapter do you want to use? Do you want to use SQLite? Do you want to use MySQL? Do you want to use Postgres? And we're going to default to Postgres since that's the agreed upon hotness of the market right now. -T says I'm turning off all the default test units, and I'm shutting off turbolinks. Now it seems kind of counterintuitive since we said like the people who wrote this said like this is the right way about going about it, and we're turning off 3 things already. We're turning off the database from what's defaulted going to be. We're turning off the testing framework, and we're removing this thing called turbolinks. In practice, so like the people who wrote it are, generally speaking, a small subset, maybe under 100 people. Now, those 100 people are extremely intelligent, but also just 100 people. As the time has gone on, and you've had tens of thousands of developers, if not hundreds of thousands of Rails developers come through the pipeline, they said that, using the default adapter, which I think was MySQL, is not quite as fast as Postgres. So they call this the prime stack. We're using Postgres as a database. We're using RSpec for testing rather than this -T stands for test unit. And then turbolinks is like one of the worst things in the world, personally speaking. So we're just going to run this, and we'll see what we get. So you can kind of see when I run Rails new with all of this stuff, all of these things are being created.
What you did just now is not a personal specification; it's a specification that tons of people use.
Yep, we're using what's called the prime stack. Yep. All right, we'll deal with this later. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got. Let's list everything out. Let's go to businesses and open this up in Sublime. Throw this over here on number 2. Close this down for a little bit. Get rid of DHH and just go to Google. First things first, let's set up our RSpec. So we turned off the default testing framework, and now we're gonna run RSpec. So we're going to go first to our gem file. Some of this does look familiar, and we'll walk through all of this in just a second. So let's jump into our gem file. There's more gems than you've ever seen before, and a lot more comments than you've seen before. So let's throw this, it doesn't really matter. Gem, RSpec, Rails. We're going to run bundle install right here. I think this is going to blow up again. This is a known issue with like the most recent version of Mac OS X. Not sure why that keeps blowing up all the time. FFI. I will look into this when we take our next break, but I think overall we should be okay. Maybe there's an FFI gem in here. Let's do bundle exec, Rails generate RSpec install. Do not find gem turbolinks. Turbo links. I do not want this here. One more time. Maybe I don't need FFI. Dang it. All right, we'll figure this out later. What we've got here is a basic Rails app. It's got 36 directories, which means 36 folders, and 56 files. And when we ran this one little command that we ran up above this thing right here, the Rails new businesses -d Postgres, this generated everything for us. Like all of this stuff was a result of running this one tiny little line, this Rails new businesses. So here's what we get in terms of just setting everything up. And again, you're not going to need to know all these different files today, but just to have some semblance of an idea of what's going on. Starting from the top, we have app. App includes most of the main meat of what we need. I don't know how to make this slightly larger, sorry. Under app assets, this is one place that we hold all of our JavaScript files, all of our CSS files, all our images and things of that nature. Do you remember the other day when we were doing things with the rock, paper, scissors, you got to choose the, that's under the public folder, like all the images were under there. All the ones that we need internally for JavaScript style sheets and images are all going to go inside this app assets. The next one is called channel, application channel. And basically what it does, it connects to what's called action cable channel base. This particular channels folder, if you decide to like do instant messaging with your Rails app, which only takes, I mean, I've seen 2 cohorts of students finish it in about 2 hours. So just by following tutorials. If you wanted to do anything with instant messaging and like, you know, being able to see it things right away, like instant messaging, all of that code would go inside of here. Controllers is the same thing that we carry over from Sinatra. It's the brains of the operation. We have helpers. These helpers basically help us with like things that we may need in the views. Jobs is basically a class that inherits from active job base. It's for doing work later, and we'll cover this I think sometime next week, if not the week after that. But the idea is kind of like you get spam emails every single day, right? So if you get spam emails from Target.com, they're not sending it to you. They send it to you at weird hours, right? Like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning on average. So it's basically saying, I'm going to do this work, but I'm going to do it at a specific time, sometime in the future. I don't want to hold up everything just to make this happen. That's jobs right here. Mailers is self-explanatory. Like this can take, if you set this up correctly, it can send emails for you. Models are the things that connect down to your database. Views are self-explanatory. It's the things that show up on the screen. The bin is generally a bunch of configuration and Rails tools, and generally speaking, you don't want to update, you don't want to touch anything inside of here. There's a lot of stuff here that I actually don't know all the things to. We generally do not spend any time inside of bin. Config is all the configuration for your different apps. So like if the most important thing that you're going to need to use is routes. So we'll talk about this in just a second. But the routes are no longer defined in the controllers. Everything is going to be under config routes. DB, the folder remains the same. It involves seeds, if you have any sort of seed files. When you run your migrations, everything will also show up in here. This is exactly the same thing as Sinatra, so nothing new there. Lib is for all the code that isn't Rails specific. Log keeps track of all the logs. Public holds any files that can be served directly to the user without the frameworks, kind of like 404.html. So if you take a look over here under public, there's a 404 page. And if I reveal, let's open this in the browser. It looks a little something like this. It doesn't rely on anything. It's just kind of like when people hit a 404, you'll see this particular page. If you see this page on the internet and you hit something, you know that that particular website is written in Ruby on Rails. This is the Ruby on Rails 404 page. And then vendor we don't really use. And then some of the other things that we still see are the same, the gem file, except that there's a lot more gems now. And then if I bundle install this and with no issues, you're going to get a gem file lock as well. So the main things that you need to worry about, I would say in terms of folders, are app, DB, and then the spec whenever this decides to work. App, you're going to be spending most of your time in controllers, models, and views. So MVC, model, view, controller. Those three particular things are going to be the most important ones. So you're going to spend most of your time in app, config under routes for all of the routes that you're going to define, DB for all your migrations, and spec.
So in Sinatra, I noticed that when you're working with anything in the views files, the root folder that it corresponds to is the public folder. So when you're like linking a style sheet or linking an image, do you have to treat it as if it's in the views folder, or is it in the public or app folder? Or
Sure. So just to reiterate, the question is, like when you're dealing with stuff in Sinatra and you wanted to get an image in, right? It's looking for it in one specific folder, right? And then you have to say like, you don't have to say like public images, whatever, you just do images, whatever, right? Inside of Rails, which Mike is going to go over tomorrow, there's things called Rails helpers, which basically say like, you don't need to specify that ever. All you have to do is just do like you can just say style sheet and then do this, like name the style sheet, and then it'll know exactly where to go. You don't have to specify where it is anymore. Okay. It's kind of cool. You'll see it in a second. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop recording right here for a second.